Hello, and welcome to Inside Cancer Careers, a podcast from the National Cancer Institute. I'm your host, Oliver Bogler. I work at the NCI in the Center for Cancer Training. On Inside Cancer Careers, we explore all the different ways that people join the fight against disease and hear their stories. Today, we're talking to Dr. Avery August of Cornell University, who shares his insights on how to support early career faculty and build a healthy research culture. Then, after the break, we speak to Dr. Jiyeon Choi of NCI's Division of Cancer Epidemiology and Genetics. She tells us about training and establishing her research team at NCI. Stick around to the end to hear our recommendations on music, a movie, and a book, and to learn how you can take your turn. So it's a pleasure to welcome Dr. Avery August to the podcast today. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Oliver.
Dr. August is Professor of Microbiology and Immunology and Deputy Provost for Academic Affairs at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, where he studies kinase signaling in the regulation of T cells in infectious disease, inflammation, and allergies. He's also a Howard Hughes Medical Institute professor. Dr. August, I'm always curious about how scientists choose to become scientists. What led you to do this work?
Well, this is, I think I was probably, like many children, very curious about the natural world. And I look back, recall sort of doing natural experiments, mixing things and capturing, bugs and bees and that sort of thing, without understanding that, what I was trying to do was science in my own way. But it wasn't really until I was in college trying to get a degree in medical technology that I was introduced to research formally by one of my faculty members who I really appreciated them doing that, Professor Costello-Brown and Phoebe D. And that's when I started my formal research experience in chemistry, actually.
And now is it fair to say you're an immunologist or you study T cells?
I think I would say I'm an immunologist, although some reviewers disagree. But
So what led you to immunology?
I too, as I was taking courses, in college, I was doing a degree in medical technology, which is sort of clinical laboratory sciences. And one of the courses that I took was immunology and serology. And what really fascinated me was the fact that the immune system has the capacity to respond to anything that it would be exposed to over the lifetime of an animal. And so that really fascinated me. And so that one course in immunology made me want to do a PhD in immunology. And so that's what I embarked on.
Fantastic. So I saw your presentation at the CABTRAC, the Cancer Biology Training Consortium meeting last October, and you spoke about diversifying faculty. I recall that you shared some interesting research published by Wei and colleagues in PNAS as part of your presentation. Would you mind telling us what they showed?
Yeah, so this is a group that's been analyzing the dynamics of sort of faculty hiring over time. They have several papers that they've published, including in Science Advances and then more recently in PNAS. In essence, what they've shown is that academic institutions tend to hire from limited number of institutions. So, I think the calculation was 24% of all faculty that are hired in academic institutions come from 10 institutions, which is a huge number when you think about the number of academic institutions that we have in the US. And also tells us something about, our blinders that we have on when we think about hiring and who we think is important enough for us to hire as faculty at our institutions. So I thought that was quite fascinating.
Yeah, we see a similar pattern when we look at some of our career development awards at NCI. It's a fascinating thing. And it seems to be common even in the liberal arts, is my understanding.
That's correct. Actually, it's even more extreme in the liberal arts, where if you wanted to become a faculty member and you're a potential graduate student, there are a handful of institutions in your particular field that will get you a faculty position.
What I also thought was interesting in that paper is the observation that success, if you will, of the faculty member is much more dependent on the institution into which they are recruited rather than the institution from which they come. Is that correct?
Yes, and actually that's the piece that really struck me, because I think it provides us with an opportunity to perhaps rethink how we look at sort of, quote, the pedigree of individuals that we're trying to hire, and also how institutions support faculty that they're hiring. And, as you said, what that paper showed was correcting for sort of the background of the candidates. What was more important for their success is the resources of the institution that they were actually hired into, as compared to what institutions they actually came from.
So that suggests that search committees should refrain from using sort of sometimes the classical shorthand that people employ, right? They look at, just a very small number of signifiers, first author publications in, so-called top journals and things like that, and perhaps consider more broadly who they might add to their faculty.
That's correct. I think potential, one can glean that from a number of different approaches, distance traveled, perhaps in candidates. But what I think, again, underlying this idea that the support, financial and otherwise, that institutions provide to the faculty that they hire is much better a predictor of their success. I mean, one can have the best training, but if you're at an institution that doesn't support you, then you won't be successful. I think it's sort of intuitive.
Yeah, and I think, you certainly presented at CABTRAC, so let me put you on the spot. You presented a mathematical model of that support, if you may permit. And I was wondering if you could explain it to our listeners. I remember you put up an equation that says R0 equals P times C times D. What is that?
Yes. So I was fascinated by, so I'm an immunologist, and sort of adjacent to infectious disease, in a way, we use some infectious disease model in our research. But I've been always fascinated, actually, since I was an undergraduate student, when I took epidemiology, about the dynamics of infectious disease. And for many people who work in infectious disease, they will recognize that formula as a formula that describes epidemics. And we've gone, we're sort of in one of those right now. And so people, we've been, I think the general public is much more aware of some of these things. And so R naught or R0 is this equation that describes whether an infectious agent will cause an epidemic if it's greater than 1. If it's equal to 1, it's going to be endemic. And if it's less than 1, then eventually it dies out, which means that the pathogen doesn't replicate enough to maintain itself in a population. So P is the probability of infection, C is the contacts per time, and D is the duration of infection. And so those functions sort of integrate to determine the dynamics of these infections. So I was fascinated by that, and because I started to think about, scientifically, how can we look at the survival, so to speak, in loose terms, of scientists in a community? And so I thought about these functions, and I thought, well, we can convert this formula where R naught is actually persistence in the scientific enterprise, success, however you might define it. And if it's greater than 1, then one will persist and be successful. If it's less than 1, then for a given population, they won't be successful if we think about those who were historically excluded or underrepresented. And if it's 1, then it's the status quo. We won't change the dynamics of who participates in science. And so for those individuals, I took the same sort of formula and thought about P, in this case, being the probability of the comfort of those individuals, C being the contacts per time that sort of make them feel like they belong, and D is the duration of that comfort. And if you think about the parameters that make us feel like we belong in a particular place, the interactions that we have, those contacts we have with those around us, increase that. And actually, as I've been talking about this, I developed a model 2.0.
Okay.
Because I've been thinking about, and those interactions that we have, and there's a fourth function, which I call theta, and I squared it, and that is sort of disparaging remarks. So we can have increased, probability of comfort. We can have increased contacts per time that make us feel comfortable. The duration can last, but that can be counteracted by a remark that someone says or an experience that one has that sort of decreases the effect of those. And so you put those all together. Again, R naught, we want that to be above 1 so that individuals can feel success.
So and theta is squared, suggesting that is something that has a profound impact, right?
Yes. And again, this comes from anecdotal experience talking to students, faculty, and others, where they can sort of be in a very welcoming environment in an institution, in their department, but there's that one thing that happens that makes them question, and that can have a profound effect. And so I thought, okay, we'll square this. I mean, it could be, it could be a higher order function.
Sure. But it kind of reframes all the positive experiences. That makes a lot of sense. Now, being a scientist, you went out and got data. So you showed us at CABTRAC a dashboard called Belonging at Cornell, which I guess you're using to monitor whether you're able to get above 1 for the R norm.
Yeah, so this is our diversity initiative here at Cornell. We developed this a few years ago. And what we do is we track elements of belonging. Do you feel like you belong at Cornell? Would you recommend Cornell a good place? And do you feel a sense of fairness at the institution? I think a sense of fairness in the literature seems to be really predictive of whether people feel like, even if they disagree with things that might be happening in an institution, if they think that those have been arrived at in a fair manner and they were part of that solution, then they're more likely to feel like they belong at an institution. And so we do regular surveys to sort of monitor that across departments, across particular subgroups. And then, of course, we also track, who we hire, and most importantly, retention. And we coordinate or integrate retention, parameters of retention, with the sense of belonging that people have. And of course, as you can imagine, I mean, most of this is intuitive, but we try to get the data from this. that if one does not feel like one feels a sense of belonging, then you're much more less likely to remain at an institution, so retention parameters go down.
Yeah, I think that's often overlooked. Retention discussions are often about dollars and lab square footage and things like that. But how you actually feel about the institution is obviously also very significant. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the first award. So this is a relatively new initiative at NIH, the Faculty Institutional Recruitment for Sustainable Transformation, abbreviated as FIRST. It's a government program. We have to have an acronym. And I know that my colleague, Dr. Sonia Springfield at NCI, was one of the architects of this program. And you were the PI of an award at Cornell in the first cohort, if I recall.
That's correct. We were fortunate enough to be in the first among the first cohort for one of those awards, and we're really, really excited about this.
And I should say that I'm being acronym happy. PI here means principal investigator, so not all our listeners will know that. So tell us, please, Dr. August, what was your first award, and what is it that you are accomplishing with it?
So our first award is, Faculty Institutional Recruitment for Sustainable Transformation, to translate that acronym. We propose to use an approach to hire up to 10 faculty in the biological and the social sciences related to health in 3 areas: in quantitative biomedical sciences, in infection biology, and in health equity. And this is a collaboration across 7 colleges and schools here at Cornell. Some 20 departments are participating. Of course, not all departments will hire, but the idea is we're using the first approaches to pilot an experiment with some interesting approaches to both hire, but more importantly, to think about this piece that we talked about earlier, which is retention and preparing the environment for individuals to be successful, increasing the probability of comfort, increasing the duration and context, and reducing the aspects of sort of disparaging remarks if we look at that formula. So we've taken the approach to use very clear check-ins with search committees in ways that, we done for a small scale, but doing it more broadly here with the first program, where we really look for individuals who have a strong interest and potential for inclusive excellence. We do that by looking at the work that they've done in the space. Do they think about how they can broadly engage with who participates in science? Do they understand the nature of the field, to understand our students who are who come from all over the world? Do they appreciate some of the perspectives of some of those students and some of the barriers that those students might have faced in entering science? And so we look for individuals who are able to speak to that in these particular areas. So there's a sort of scientific component, but also understanding of the culture of science that we'd like to embody here. We have regular check-ins with the search committees that are doing these searches, such that we can sort of underline some of the principles that we're trying to do here. And we started this by bringing in potential candidates in what we call the first symposium, early career candidates. And we brought in about 25 individuals. We announced this broadly. We got a number of applications. We selected a smaller number because we could only accommodate about 25 of those individuals to come. And this was a 2.5-day event. We spent a lot of time interacting with these individuals. We did some workshops on them on the faculty search, what we do here at Cornell, obviously. And then they also spent about a day with the departments that were hiring. And then those individuals then got fed into searches that the departments were hiring. And so where we are now is we've started to make some offers for some of those searches. I think we have at least 2 offers that have gone out. We have 3 or 4 more that are being developed as we speak. And so the idea is by integrating some strong principles of check-ins, by looking for individuals who appreciate the inclusive excellence, and then bringing them to campus and then introducing them to the departments, we hope to be able to sort of boost hiring in this area.
It's a much more high-touch approach to hiring than I guess is traditionally done, and I guess emphasizing also the cohort nature of the hiring.
That's correct. So, and it's very interesting to see how much interest potential candidates have paid to being part of a cohort that has these components in it.
Fantastic. I understand that the first program also has a sort of national integration of amongst the different first awards. Is that correct? Is that part of the process?
Yeah, that's correct. But I've only told you about half of what we're doing.
Oh.
So the other half,
please,
which is actually really, really important for us, and in terms of how we've come and arrived at this approach, is at the same time as we're doing the hiring piece, we're working with departments to prepare them for who they're hiring. And so departments that are participating in the first search, we're working with the chairs, we're working with the department faculty themselves, we're doing climate surveys in those departments to both understand the climate that those faculty will come into, but also work with those faculty to say, here's who you're hiring, Here's what they bring to your department. Here's how you can support them so that we can, we do what we devote all these resources to hiring. And we want to devote equal amount of resources to retaining those faculty when they come. So when they arrive, they have a higher probability for being comfortable. The duration of contacts is high. We reduce that sort of, disparaging remarks that increase that R naught for persistence here in those departments. So that's the other piece that's happening at the same time as we're working to hire faculty.
That makes a lot of sense, of course, yeah. So thank you. Back to the question about the national integration. Is there a national integration in FIRST?
Yes. So the FIRST institutions meet very regularly, once a month, or, depending on the group. We have several, sort of subgroups that meet. And, the first cohort started with about 6 or 7 institutions that were meeting. We now have a second cohort that have joined this group. And the idea really is to exchange, what we're doing. We're all very different institutions. Some are, medical schools, some are smaller undergraduate focused institutions. Some are collaborations between 2 institutions. And so it's really interesting to both see the diversity of approaches, with the diversity of institutions, and some of the hurdles that we all have in trying to do this in a way that's successful. And so we get together regularly. We have an evaluation core that's working together. We have a faculty development core that's been working together. And then, of course, we also, coming up in May, all of those institutions will meet together. We'll bring the faculty that we've already hired so that they can meet each other, and ongoing, these faculty will become, a part of a national cohort in addition to the local cohort that we're hiring at the institutions.
That's fantastic. So underlying this work is culture change, essentially, which is not easy. How are you measuring that? How successful has it been at Cornell so far?
Yes. So culture change is, we can do all these sort of what I call mechanical things, but what's really important is if the unit, the department that's hiring those faculty, and an institution that's hiring those faculty, is able to adjust its culture to accommodate people who haven't been there before. And that's a long-term strategy. I mean, that culture change comes from both culture change in society, but importantly, how the institution views the climate and the culture at the institution. And that's coming back to our Belonging at Cornell initiative. That's what we monitor. So we survey every 2 years. We're just digesting our survey here at Cornell that happened last fall. The FIRST institutions are also participating in a survey that's run out of Brandeis that's sort of doing a similar thing. So we have both our internal survey that we've been doing for some time, but also surveys across the FIRST institutions that's run out of Brandeis that will allow us to sort of start to track with, matrices that change. And one of the interesting things that in looking at this data over time is that if you look at an institution, you can see small shifts of climate, but what's really important, especially as institutions get more diverse and hire more diverse faculty, is whether those faculty that are coming in, whether they feel welcome. Because if you look at the institutional level, where still the majority of faculty are, have been there for some time, they feel, happy, and their happiness sort of doesn't change very much. But what is useful, and this is where the data comes in that's important, is looking at subpopulations in at the department level where a lot of the activity is happening, so that you can determine whether those individuals that are joining the institution are finding an environment such that they feel like they belong and they feel happy. And so parsing that data is really important.
Fantastic. You also shared with us at CapTrack faculty development work that you're doing. You presented the CAN model. I'm sure that's part of the strategy as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, so the CAN model is something that our faculty development core developed here. Dr. E.L. Levite, Dr. Cindy Leifer here, who leads that core. And it's sort of a model that, is culturally aware, network and navigate model. And the sort of core of this, and it's evolved to be fairly nuanced and complex, is, many of our graduate programs use an individual development plan model called an IDP to sort of try to determine and understand the needs of our students so that we can provide them with the appropriate enhancements for their success. And that will be different for each student, because every student comes and arrives at our institutions with different preparation and different strengths and areas of improvement. And so that's a similar model that we're using for the faculty. We hired, these are all fantastic individuals. They've been very successful, and they're all areas where they've spent a lot of time and are very good, and areas where, there could be room for improvement. And so The CAN model, the A stands for advocate. So we have sponsors, we have mentors that support those faculty. The N stands for network. So we want to we want to build a network for those individuals, connect them with program officers, connect them with the individuals in their discipline that can support them. And that's sort of at a pair level, at the community level. And we want to cultivate and challenge those individuals by ensuring that they receive rigorous workshops in grant writing, in professional development, get really strong feedback, and then help them to navigate and nurture in these environments. So again, supporting this idea of increasing the probability of comfort and that R naught, so it's above 1.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I wonder if lastly, you might share with us the advice that you're giving to the students and the postdocs that are in your own lab, in your own research team, who are thinking about their own futures. What are you saying to them?
Yeah, so one of the things that we had here at Cornell, and I was also the principal investigator on, is a BEST program, which was also run out of the Office of the Director of the NIH. And BEST stood for Broadening Experiences in Scientific Training. And I'm starting there because the idea behind this program, which is now has been now picked up nationally, is to ensure that all of our trainees have the best information that they need to make informed choices about their careers. And so what that means is to think about where would you like to be in the next, short term, midterm, and long term, and how can we provide you with the resources and the information, point you to the right place. It might not be from me, it might be from someone else who has better information, for you to get that information that can then help you make those decisions. And so those are the sort of conversations I have with my students. Some of my students want to become faculty members, and so we talked about, what would you need to be competitive in an academic environment? Others want to go to industry. What would you need to do that? What sort of experiences would you need to have? And then supporting that. And this is all, of course, in addition to being, sort of providing the mentoring, the scientific mentoring that happens in the research labs. And so I would love to see my students go on and become successful academics, but I also would love to see them become successful in whatever it is that they would like to do. And so that's the approach that I take with my students.
That's fantastic. I mean, this podcast, although it's focused on cancer, is focused on all the cancer careers. So we certainly appreciate that stance because there are so many different ways that people can contribute. Dr. August, thank you so much for spending time with us and sharing all your experience and insights with us. My pleasure. This was a fun conversation. Thank you. The NCI recently launched a new online seminar series. Here to tell us more is Naz Zahir, the director of the Cancer Training Branch.
Yes, we launched the NCI Rising Scholars Cancer Research Seminar Series in January to highlight the research and contributions made by NCI-supported postdoctoral fellows and early career investigators at NCI laboratories and NCI-funded institutions nationwide. The talks are every month on the third Thursday, and you can see them and register for them on the NCI website. There will be a link in the show notes, or you can search for NCI Rising Scholars.
That sounds great. What kind of topics are there speakers covering?
We have a broad range of topics, pretty much any kind of cancer research. We have had basic science topics, clinical research, health disparities, cancer prevention, immunology, and many more. Each talk is related to a recent publication by the presenter, and there is plenty of time for Q&A.
What if you missed a talk?
We post a recording of the presentation a few days after the talk, along with a transcript and captions, so you can always catch the talks at your convenience.
Thanks, Naz. Check out NCI's Rising Scholar Seminar Series if you're interested in some great research that's increasing knowledge right now. It's a pleasure to welcome Dr. Jiyeon Choi to the podcast today. Welcome.
Thank you.
Dr. Choi is a Stadman investigator in the Laboratory of Translational Genomics in NCI's Division of Cancer Epidemiology and Genetics. She studies genetic susceptibility to melanoma and lung cancer. Let's start at the beginning, Dr. Choi. What first led you to think about a career in science or a career in cancer research?
So cancer research specific kind of came a little later in my career, but for science, I guess I think I liked math a little bit when I was little. Not too much in science, but in high school, I had a crush on my biology teacher. So that led me to biology as a major in college. And it kind of grew on me slowly because I didn't see my career as a researcher right off the college. So I started working for this company. And then which involves actually very high-tech technology back then, like high-throughput sequencing and microarray, and then related to like this booming human genome project and then all that. So that kind of got me interested in science and technology in general, so that eventually I went back to graduate school to study further and then started studying genetics. So then I initially started with the neuropsychiatric diseases and then move over to cancer for my postdoctoral training. And then that was a little more practical decision in terms of choosing cancer field, because compared to neuroscience, the systems that you can study your subject is very much more, I would say, versatile and available. So you can get cancer cell lines from patients much more easily than when you need to study the brain, where we have to go to mouse models.
So you're able to get closer to the patient with cancer.
That's true, yes.
Excellent. So then you are doing genetics, you got interested in cancer. What made you pick genetic susceptibilities as a specific discipline?
Yeah, so I guess it's the question that I'm most interested in. So you can get cancer from environmental factors. People know that contribute to cancer, but even some people are exposed to the same amount of carcinogen, for example, but how the human body react to those stimulus is not the same. So there could be a lot of reasons, but genetic factor clearly is one very particular, specific factor that contribute to that. So it always intrigues me how we're sort of designed from the beginning to be susceptible to something versus another. So yeah, that's an intriguing question to me.
Yeah, I mean, you study lung cancer. I mean, when I was growing up, there was a lot of smoking. A lot of people smoked. And we all knew someone's grandpa who, was in their 90s, who'd smoked their whole life, never had a lung problem. And then, of course, there were also other people who may never have smoked or may have smoked for a short period of time who had lung cancer. So clearly, just knowing that, you'd think there must be something different in the genetics. Interesting. You also study melanoma. So how are those two cancers different in terms of susceptibility?
Sure. So they're different. For example, you can actually measure the heritability from the populations. So how much genetics explain the variability in the risk of a certain disease. So there are different methods. Not one method is perfect, but if you use those like multiple measures, melanoma seems to have higher heritability than lung cancer. But both cancers have very strong, well-known environmental factor, smoking for lung cancer and UV exposure for melanoma. So since I studied mainly melanoma for my postdoctoral training, it was really interesting connection that the fact that they have different heritability levels, but they're strong environmental factors. So I found some similarity between two cancers in that way.
So you did your bachelor's degree in Korea. You came to the United States for your PhD to Rutgers University, if I recall.
Yes.
And did your postdoc then at the NCI. What was it like moving from one country, one culture to another as you did your training?
Yeah, obviously there are a lot of challenges, and also it's an adventure, right? And so the goal is science, so that's pretty clear. And in the laboratory setting, we speak international language of science. So in that sense, it's familiar. But since as an adult, I live in a different country. So to me, it feels like being a teenager forever. So you try to define yourself, how to behave, try to read the cultural cue. And, I feel less and less over time, but still it doesn't go away.
Of course. So you were a postdoc at the NCI, and of course, you were part of the intramural research program. Now, not everybody knows that there's research actually happening at the NCI. Now you lead a group there. So what's it like doing research in the intramural program?
Yeah, so as you said, a lot of people consider NCI as the kind of money lender, where you get the research funding from. But in NCI, we have a lot of fantastic intramural research programs. So I was lucky to be able to discover great postdoctoral opportunities in NCI. So, and then when I was a postdoctoral fellow here, I was able to recognize a lot of benefits because compared to the university setting where I was a graduate student, in NCI and in bigger NIH, postdoctoral fellows are actually the majority, the main people. We don't have too many graduate students. So actually, the institute actually cares about postdocs a lot and their career development. So I really felt I had a lot of resources to go for when I need help, especially in developing my career. And so that's how I kind of knew that, there's going to be a lot of benefit even as a PI, because we don't really need to write grants to get funding for our research. We do get kind of audited or reviewed from outside a scientific community because we're using tax money. So we have to justify if our research is valid. So we get reviewed every 4 years, regardless of tenureship. So, but still, it's very collaborative environment and also rich resources. So yeah, I highly recommend people to take some interest in this area of NIH.
Take a look, yeah. So you're part of the Division of Cancer Epidemiology and Genetics, which is one of the two sort of groups, if you will, inside NCI's intramural research program, the other being the Center for Cancer Research. Tell us about DCEG. What is it?
Oh, yeah. So I was trained as a molecular geneticist, so like mainly doing wet lab work. So still the CCR, the other part of NCI, is much bigger in terms of number, and I think it's better known to kind of lab scientists. But the DCEG is mainly doing epidemiology and an epidemiological study of cancer. So we care more about etiology and what that can lead us for better prevention and prediction and early detection. So curing cancer, and when in the therapy setting, when you're already diagnosed and then developed a lot, people put a lot more money into that. But catching it early, it saves more lives, obviously, right?
Yeah.
So you could save life by simple surgery in the early stage if we have tools to find and detect cancer earlier. So, but this is using population scale data, a lot of registry data, and then survey data. So a lot of it is computational, and then traditionally the training trajectories were pretty different. But especially in our branch in the division, we also have wet lab space. So we are kind of trying to bridge two areas of experimental science and population study.
So in 2019, I think you transitioned from being a fellow to being a principal investigator leading your own research group. What was that like?
Well, yeah, I transitioned within the same branch. So that was interesting because all of a sudden I was a lowly postdoc, and then now like I have a lab. So yeah, so it was very exciting because I was a little familiar with the system already. So now I get to like do a lot of different things, independently. So that was really cool. And we have a good support system here. All the senior PIs are very supportive. And then we, particularly in our branch, we have very collaborative environment. So that has been really fun, but also at the same time, it's late 2019. So as soon as I started, we hit the pandemic, so lab closed. So yeah, so starting a lab anywhere is pretty challenging, and the pandemic didn't help much. So yeah, it was a struggle, but it's getting much better right now.
I can only imagine. What was the most challenging part of starting the lab?
Yeah, so it's a totally different mindset, at least to me, because as a postdoc, I've never been trained in how to manage a lab, how to manage people, how to hire people, how to spend money, budgeting, and things like that. So most of what I do is not actually generating or analyzing data. It's more managing part, and then meetings and networking with other scientists to kind of find our space in the scientific community. So yeah, that's very different, but yeah, having fun so far.
Fantastic. Now, I believe you're a Stadman investigator. Can you tell us about the Stadman program?
Yeah, so Stadman program is NIH-wide program to recruit principal investigators. So it's not just within an NIH, but anywhere in the world, people can apply. And the program starts a little early in the game. So I think early fall, we collect the candidates. And then I think there's a central committee who select X number of percent. And then each institutes within NIH could pick the qualifying candidate to interview. So it comes with the title. So that's prestigious. And also we have kind of good cohorts of people that we can reach out to once you become one. And as I said earlier, like it's intramural. So we are given the funding as opposed to write grants every time for each project.
Right. So you have a network of other STADMIN investigators across NIH that you can connect with. Is that right?
Yeah, you can do that. I mean, there's like no organized official things, but yeah, we kind of know at least a few of them. Yeah.
You know of each other.
Yes.
And I believe you're also an NIH Distinguished Scholar, correct?
Yes.
What is that program?
Okay, so that's a newer program where each year out of Stedman pool and also other route, they select these investigators who are dedicated to promoting diversity and reduce health disparities. So they select the scholars, and then this is really well-structured program where we're given mentoring from senior investigator regularly. We're given opportunities to network, and also the cohort membership is like very strong. And then we have our chat group, and then we meet regularly, so support each other and exchange information. So that has been really fantastic.
What's the most important thing, do you think, of being part of such a community, such a cohort? How has that helped you get started?
Sure. So I was saying a little bit about transitioning from postdoc to PI. So as a postdoc, you have a lot of people in your group. You have a peer group because like you're not large in number, but all of a sudden all the peers disappear. And then, right, one of the challenges as a PI in the beginning is you cannot really find a peer group easily. But these are group of people who are in the same stage mostly as you. And also we have the same goal, not just get your lab up and going and then making it successful, but we have good cause to promote diversity. So that's really a good group, and we have good repertoire in our group.
So it's slightly less lonely at the top when you have a cohort.
Certainly.
Excellent. And just finally then, now you are a PI, you have your own research team, you've got postdocs and students and folks. What advice are you giving them as they work in your group and think about their own futures?
Yeah, so they usually come in with some sort of sense of what to do. So if they have clear goal, then I try to help them achieve the goal. But if they don't, then especially some people are debating between should I be a PI or like should I go other quote unquote alternative route? But in reality, the alternative route is the majority. So I tell them that don't be fixated in becoming a PI, and you do it only if you like it. But at the same time, for people who are not confident enough, then I try to make sure to tell them that do not give up just because because of lack of self-confidence. And it's not the most horrible job in the world. So yeah, I try to give advice in both ways.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Choi, for coming on the podcast and sharing your personal journey and your experiences. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now it's time for a segment that we call Your Turn, because it's a chance for our listeners to send in a recommendation that they would like to share. If you're listening, then you're invited to take your turn. Send us a tip for a book, a video, a podcast, or a talk, or anything that you found inspirational or amusing or interesting. You can send those to us at ncicc@nih.gov. Record a voice memo and send it along. We may just play it in an upcoming episode. Now I'd like to invite our guests to take their turn. Let's start with you, Dr. August.
Thanks, Dr. Bogler. So, I enjoy listening and actually mixing electronic music. And so one of the things I would recommend is one of my favorite artists. He's called Congo Nati. He's a UK artist, and he has a really interesting history, but also some really interesting music. It's sort of a blend of reggae, electronic music, sort of unique in this space. So I like to big up his props whenever I can. Congo Nati.
That sounds like fun. Is he on Spotify?
He's on Spotify.
All right. We'll dig out a link and put it in the show notes for our listeners to check. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Dr. Choi.
So my recommendation is a movie that I watch regularly. It's called Free Solo. It was out a few years ago. It's a documentary of this person, professional climber, Alex Honnold, who free soloed El Capitan of Yosemite. And I'm a climber myself, like beginner, just a few years in. Not that good, but it's just like something about this documentary, both entertaining and also, I don't know, encouraging me sometimes. Yeah. So yeah, the best part is that you're watching somebody risking their life, doing this extraordinary thing while you're eating potato chips. So that's pretty fun.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dr. Choi. And I'd like to make a recommendation as well. It's a book I read a few years back, which had a profound impact on me. It's called Factfulness by Dr. Hans Rosling. He's co-authored it with his son and daughter-in-law, who worked together with him at the Gapminder Foundation. Dr. Rosling, who died in 2017, was a medical doctor, professor of international health, and influencer. He was famous for a series of TED Talks that described the world through facts. You may have seen his famous animated bubble graphs. The premise of this eye-opening book is that most people answer questions about global trends incorrectly because of 10 instincts that distort our perspective and because of biases that we harbor. It encourages a worldview based on facts, and it's filled with beautiful data and shows that while there is much that needs urgent attention, armed with facts, we see some progress in the world and can take heart that positive change is possible. That's all we have time for on today's episode of Inside Cancer Careers. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to our guests. We want to hear from you. Your stories, your ideas, and your feedback are always welcome. And you're invited to take your turn to make a recommendation that we can share with our listeners. You can reach us at ncicc@nih.gov. Inside Cancer Careers is a collaboration between NCI's Office of Communications and Public Liaison and the Center for Cancer Training. It is produced by Angela Jones and Astrid Masfar, and edited by Jeanette Gozer. A special thanks to Lakshmi Grama and Sabrina Islam Rahman. Join us every first and third Thursday of the month when new episodes can be found wherever you listen. Subscribe so you won't miss an episode. I'm your host, Oliver Bogler from the National Cancer Institute, and I look forward to sharing your stories here on Inside Cancer Careers. If you have questions about cancer or comments about this podcast, email us at nci.info@nih.gov or call us at 800-422-6237. And please be sure to mention Inside Cancer Careers in your query. We are a production of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, National Institutes of Health, National Cancer Institute. Thanks for listening.